There we go. Thank you so much, young lady. Welcome. We will now see if we can get the share screen to work on the first shot. Doesn't usually work, but we'll try it. Voila. Okay. Okay. Somebody give me a thumbs up so you can see the document that says 6/13/21. Thank you very much. Okay, blast off. Welcome. So we are expanding our study of Ruach HaKodesh meditation with a review of Rabbi Kaplan's essay, Immortality and the Soul. We're doing part 3 of 3, What the Dead Think of Us. This guy actually wrote about that. And we'll also discuss understanding distractions to improve your meditation practice, part 3. Thus far, we've covered the Amidah, achieving consciousness of God through prayer, Hidbodedut, becoming mindful through internal and external isolation, and we're at Ruach HaKodesh, also known as Enlightenment, transcending the physical through work on yourself. We're going to be on this segment for a while because it's very expansive and it deals with how you live, which is a very meaty topic. And it's so interesting to see that how you live can actually be considered a meditation. Upcoming, there'll be unification, experiencing oneness with God by reciting the Shema, and blessing power meditations to bring you closer to God through mundane acts. Rabbi Kaplan has those, and there's other ones too, which I'll add to our list of upcoming episodes. What have we learned so far about enlightenment? Rabbi Kaplan is mentioning that there are 3 words usually used to refer to the soul: nefesh, ruach, and neshama. And he's very familiar with Kabbalists who say these are the 3 most important levels. At some point, we'll see if we can find out the sub-levels under the important levels. And he says that there are steps leading to Ruach HaKodesh outlined in the Talmud: study, carefulness, diligence, cleanliness, abstention, purity, piety, humility, fear of sin, and holiness. So he's saying that you can advance through your soul by personal growth and developing these midot. That's fascinating, and that idea is going to be a linchpin for our study going forward, meaning we're going to see the importance of what kind of person you make yourself to be in how you live and also how you die. Rabbi Kaplan talked about nefesh, ruach, and neshama in general terms. We then pivoted to Ethan Dorshav, and he elaborated on those terms for us and gave us this 4-dimensional idea of soul. The biosphere, where we have the basar and eitzim, the bones and the fleshy biology around them. We have the water component of the nefesh. We have the wind component of the ruach, and then we have the fire component of the shema. And he mentions that there were so many references in Tanakh to back this up, this 4-dimensional idea of the soul. And he also mentioned that there's integration between us and our environment and all these spheres. And we're very much aware of that. I mean, when we eat other fleshy animals, we're interchanging with the biosphere. You have a steak dinner, you are interchanging with the biosphere. And, what comes in, comes out, and that's part of the biology. We know there's compost. And we know that we integrate, we exchange with the water sphere when we drink. And we know that we exchange with the wind sphere. We could have a room full of animals here, dogs and cats and everything, and people, and we'll all be exchanging gases. There's already integration going on between us and that part of the environment. And then the Shema is the part that integrates with Shemayim type of thing, which we got into a little bit, which we'll get into more. so so this integration that he's talking about, that is mentioned time and time again in Tanakh, when we die, how we do our final integration, that is a norm that takes place while we're living. We are always integrating with that part of our environment, except that when we die, it becomes more permanent. But that, as we discussed, is the macro level. But what about me? What about you? What about the individual? What is that like when he dies? So for that, we went back to Rabbi Kaplan, and we started this series of 3 essays in Immortality and the Soul. The first one was Meet the Real You. And we asked questions: are you your body? Are you your brain? Are you your memories? Where do you go when you die? And he talked about God's memory, which is kind of like your experiences in your life kind of get written to the disk like a computer, and that's God's memory, so to speak. And that's kind of appears to be the way Ethan Dorshab was talking about the Neshama, that it integrates in somehow with God's name, and do our memories in some way integrate with God's memory type of thing. So we're getting in the ballpark of some kind of integration with God and whoever else in the fire sphere. Okay. We then talked a bit about, in the second essay, we talked about, the second essay called Naked Before God, we talked about what is immortality like? What is the purpose of the brain and nervous system? We talked about the mental activity and the disembodied soul, looking at oneself, standing naked before God, no rationalization, burning shame and judgment, meaning that he described that the brain and the nervous system kind of act as filters. And if we didn't have this filter, and we were exposed to both all our thoughts in our subconscious as well as everything that's around us, it would be overwhelming. So he quotes scientists, and he quotes Torah and Kabbalah, and talks about how the brain and the nervous system are kind of like a filter. He goes, but the problem is that when you die, your brain and nervous system are part of the physical realm, and they're not functioning. You don't have this filter. And he mentioned that the filter is not just a screen, but it's a tool we use to suppress feelings, to push aside thoughts, to rationalize, to kid ourselves, to deceive ourselves, to not face ourselves and not face the truth. And the problem becomes that when we die, there's still some kind of awareness, and that awareness doesn't have the filter anymore, doesn't have the brain to use to rationalize things. So you have to, you see yourself and your life and the world without a filter, and all your unresolved stuff is there for you to see. So he headed us in the direction of, that could be a horrible experience for some people if they have unfinished business, if they felt shame about what they're doing, and they no longer have the filtering apparatus to put the shame aside and convince themselves that they're really good people when they're really not. And he talked about Gehenna and some kind of torturous kind of experience. And, naturally questions pop up. Well, who exactly ends up there? How bad do you have to be to have this shame-filled experience, which we're going to get into? So you could see that Rabbi Kaplan, in these first 2 essays in this book of Immortality and the Soul, he's making points that bring us back to his prior point about Ruach HaKodesh. Why? Because he's emphasizing that In order to achieve Ruach HaKodesh, enlightenment, you have to become a certain type of person with certain type of very positive midot. Well, if you become a very good person with very positive midot, it goes to reason you'd have a lot less to be ashamed about. You're living a certain way that doesn't bring shame upon you and your family and the people and God. So there's a correlation there. So we're getting in the ballpark now of realizing that that how you live can have a really direct impact on how you die. And that if you don't have a lot of unfinished business, if you lived what they would say a virtuous life, or certainly a Torah life, then the transition of the you-ness, when you die, is not that bad. Now, I've heard many definitions of what Gehenna is and what it's all about. And depending on how much we progress today, we're going to start that next week because we got a really good source for it. Okay. But for today, we're going to finish up part 3 of Immortality in the Soul, which is what the dead think of us. And Rabbi Kaplan actually talks about that. What does he say? Let's take a look. The chief question here is, do the dead know what is happening in the world of the living? This is what he says. There is another dimension of immortality discussed in the Talmud. It asks, do the dead know what is happening in the world of the living? After an involved discussion, the Talmud concludes that they do have this awareness. The Kabbalistic philosophers explain that the soul achieves a degree of unity with God, the source of all knowledge, and therefore also partakes of his omniscience. So there's some kind of you having this awareness. And because there's some kind of integration with God, that then you then tap into the omniscience in some way that God has, and you are aware of things that you weren't aware of before, because God was already aware of them. You're connected to him, and he sees it all, so you kind of see more stuff. When a man dies, he enters a new world of awareness. He exists as a disembodied soul and yet is aware of what is happening in the physical world. Gradually, he learns to focus on any physical event he wishes. So you have a freedom of choice here. You're in this, you're seeing the world anew. You're seeing the physical world, and it's more, you're seeing more than you did when you were alive, and you have the choice on what to focus on. At first, this is a frightening experience. You know that you are dead. You can see your body lying there with your friends and relatives standing around crying over you. We are taught that immediately after death, the soul is in a great state of confusion. And by the way, he does list sources here. What is the main source of its attention? What draws its focus more than anything else? We are taught that it is the body. Most people identify themselves with their bodies, as we have discussed earlier. It is difficult for a soul to break this thought habit, and therefore, for the first few days, the soul is literally obsessed with its previous body. This is alluded to the verse in Job, and his soul mourns for him. Okay, that's kind of interesting. So Job is considered quite the Navi on a metaphysical level here. This is especially true before the body is buried. The soul wonders what will happen to the body. It finds it to be both fascinating and frightening to watch its own body's funeral arrangements and preparation for burial. So the you, however we're defining the you here, the you that is persisting after the rest of you is integrating with the biosphere and the water sphere and the wind sphere, the you that is persisting is watching this, what's going on to this body. And to the extent that you're still identified with the body, it's you are watching you in your own funeral. So you can see there's, the sooner you detach from that, the better, because the body's going to be disappearing. So you don't want to be attached to it for too much longer. Of course, this is one of the reasons why Judaism teaches us that we must have the utmost respect for human remains. We can imagine how painful it is for a soul to see its recent body cast around like an animal carcass. The Torah therefore forbids this. So this is like remarkable because it's showing a sense of compassion for the you that persists when the rest of you, when you're dead, there's a you that persists. And according to Rabbi Kaplan's understanding of Torah, the reason why we have to take proper care of a mate, of a corpse, is out of compassion for the you that had, for the individual of that is persisting past that body. I will add that when our daughter-in-law Alana's father passed a couple of Novembers ago, I was asked to be a shomer in the funeral home. And I got this call like at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, really? Okay. And my comment was, but the funeral home has a Chevra Kadisha. And the Chevra Kadisha will provide shomrim. I said, why isn't that good enough? They said, we want somebody that he knew there from this point of view, that the family, because they were strangers. He didn't know people from the Chevra Kadisha. And there was this idea the family had, that he would be more comfortable in this passing if you were there. I'm like, fine, good. So I did. And I thought this was like this idea in application. That family had this understanding of this.
What mitzvah? I didn't realize I was on off of mute to begin with, but I see that I am. And while I'm here, what a great mitzvah for you, Steve. That's so exciting, and that you participated. And now the stuff that you're teaching is extremely deep.
Oh, you ain't getting it, Steve.
Oh, but on top of that is this is stuff that I've thought about for all my life, I think. So the very first thing that you said was, there's like something you introduced in the third sentence, maybe something about, well, when you die, you don't have any kind of covering or something. You didn't use that word, and I forget what you used, but what you said was, what did you say? What were those words? Do you remember?
I know. We'll go over it though. Put it on pause. Put it on pause. We got to finish this. But we'll talk. We'll talk.
Yeah.
Okay. This is also related to the question of autopsies. We can imagine how a soul would feel when seeing its body lying on the autopsy table being dissected and examined. The disembodied soul spends much of its time learning how to focus. So that is like really interesting. There's the disembodied you, and the focusing is like, it has the ability to focus. It needs to teach itself how to focus, because it's not using our usual focus tools like the eyes and stuff. So there's a different tool that you have when you die that still allows you to focus and perceive. It's just not within the body. It is now seeing without physical eyes, using some process which we do not even have the vocabulary to describe. The Kabbalists call this frightening process kaf hakela. It is like being thrown with a sling from one end of the world to another. It is alluded to in the verse of the first book of Samuel: the soul of my master shall be bound up in the bundle of life with the Lord your God, and the souls of your enemies shall he sling out as from the hollow of a sling. I don't know about the enemies reference, but that's kind of like the sensation he's describing. The soul perceives things flashing into focus from all over and is in a state of total confusion and disorientation, which kind of makes sense based on what he said previously, because he talked about the brain and the nervous system acting as a filter. You don't have that anymore when you're dead. So you're being bombarded by stuff. One of the few things that the soul has little difficulty focusing on is its own body. It is a familiar pattern, and some tie seems to remain. To some extent, it is a refuge from its disorientation. So he's saying, at least on a temporary basis, this attachment you have to your body is a good thing, because you can like ground yourself. And as you get used to the bombardment of stimuli that up to that point you have been filtering, but you can't filter anymore because you don't have the filtering apparatus. It's dead. It's not functioning. So so you would think that you don't want to stay attached to the body because it's going, but at least on a temporary basis, you want to stay attached until you get your bearings. Of course, the body begins to decompose soon after it is buried. The effect of watching this must be both frightening and painful. The Talmud teaches us worms are as painful to the dead as needles in the flesh of the living. As it is written in Job, his flesh grieves for him. Most commentaries rate that this refers to the psychological anguish of the soul in seeing its earthly habitation in a state of decay. The Kabbalists call this chibut kever, the punishment of the grave. We are taught that what happens to the body in the grave can be even worse, an even worse experience than Gehenna. All right, I don't know. But so the question is, there's two processes going on. One is you're being attached to your body, but going through a process of detachment. And secondly, the body disintegrating. So it goes to reason, if you can detach from your body faster than it disintegrates, then you don't suffer this anguish, so to speak, of watching it disintegrate because you're away from it. So that seems to be key. The extent to which you've started off detached from your body and can continue the detachment. So that the question then, of course, is how do you detach from your body? What does that mean? Okay, and here he goes. This meaning the experience of watching your body decay. This varies among individuals. The more one is obsessed with one's body and the material world in general during his lifetime, the more he will be obsessed with it after death. As you live is how you die. From the man to whom the material was everything, this deterioration of the body is most painful. On the other extreme, the person who was immersed in the spiritual may not care very much about the fate of his body at all. He finds himself very much at home in the spiritual realm and might quickly forget about his body entirely. This is what we are taught. Tzaddikim are not bothered by chibut kever at all, since they never consider their worldly bodies overly important. In general, adjustment to the spiritual world depends greatly on one's preparation in this world. That's like right out of Pirkei Avot. Our traditions teach us that the main preparation is through Torah. Okay, so he's wrapping up. Many of us think of death as a most frightening experience. Tzaddikim, on the other hand, have looked forward to it. Shortly before his death, Rabbi Nachman said, I very much want to divest myself of this garment that is my body. If we truly believe and trust in a merciful God, then death has no terror for us. And he sums up, this is a description of what our tradition teaches about the soul's existence. Most of these facts are from the teachings of Chazal in the Talmud and Medrash as interpreted by the Kabbalists. Here we have synthesized their interpretations with the terminology of modern scientific concepts. The result is a consistent view of soul and human personality as realities, which do not possess the body's temporal discontinuity called death. So just with this idea about the spiritual stuff, so it seems to me that what does it mean to live spiritual? This stuff: study, carefulness, diligence, cleanliness, abstention, purity, piety, humility, fear of sin, holiness. I mean, if you work on these things, you're going to end up a lot more spiritual than material. I mean, that's pretty much, I think that's pretty clear. So that's the case, then you are achieving Ruach HaKodesh, and you're making the experience of death much easier. So this is an example of how, okay, now, how have we been describing meditation up to this point? The fundamental feature of meditation that we do at the end of every class is this detachment. You are stepping away from your thought stream that comes up from the subconscious, your thoughts and your feelings and this and that and the other thing experiences, churning. But we're developing the skill of being able to look at that objectively and control that. So the life that is dedicated to these 10 midot, you are in essence doing the same kind of thing on a grand scale, where you are stepping aside from the material. It doesn't mean you're not doing the material, but you're not attached to it. As you see? So purity, I mean, how many, we know pure, think of purity, you understand this. So what I'm saying is that a life based on not being like an ascetic in a cave, but a life based on living in this world, but with a focus on developing this midot, helps you do the detachment that is necessary to achieve Ruach HaKodesh, enlightenment, and have a peaceful passage when you die. And that's how meditation is through living Torah living. So in a way, you can say that that what Torah living is itself a 24/7 meditation, because it develops that detachment. You are in this world and you're above this world at the same time.
Steve, I just listened to this guy, a really nice rabbi, talk about the detachment in a way of defining the mitzvot as being voluntarily disempowerment of the body. So the mitzvot that Hashem gave us, it wasn't because he wanted us to do this and not do that, but just to enable us to, instead of so it would be voluntarily disempowerment of the body, as opposed to what God would do would be involuntary. So the mitzvot are voluntary disempowerment of the body, and that's helping us to detach, just like you're saying.
Yeah.
And the very first thing when you spoke about filters, that's what the word I was looking for. And you said, well, we won't have filters. Well, goodness, that we should learn not to have so many filters while we're alive, so we could be more aware of what it's going to be like, or what it should be like, and, attaching to Hashem and all this. Your lecture, I'm telling you, was like really dynamite. So
thank you. Tell your friends. Next week,
I
commit
did,
to
but I
getting
have
25 people that watching this thing.
You're
All right.
doing great stuff.
Thank you. Now, next week, all right, so we did finish this. Next week, we're going to take a deep dive on Gehenna, because there's a lot of confusion about that. And Rabbi Kaplan mentioned it as a potential experience when you die. He said he said last week, a number of our great teachers write that the fire of Gehenna is actually the burning shame one experiences because of his sins. We find that evil leads to shame. Key point. So we find that evil leads to shame. So we're not talking about, oh, gee, I wasn't nice enough. We're talking about people doing really bad things and that end up in Gehenna. And we're going to be asking the question, well, what sins are evil as opposed to non-evil sins? And how does the pursuit of Ruach HaKodesh help us avoid them? So this is what we're going to focus on next week. It's going to be mind-blowing, but it's also going to be reassuring because, people walk around trying to do good and they try to I'm a good person, but I fell short. I'm only human. Does this mean I'm going to fry when I die? And I think once you get a picture of at least this definition of evil that we're talking about, I don't think anybody here is doing that stuff. Rest assured.
I'm almost ashamed that I'm interjecting again, but the very thing that you spoke about.
But what do we have to do to get you to feel more ashamed?
Look, the shame, the same rabbi I spoke of, he intertwined the shame to be actually our disconnection with God, and therefore we do feel shameful, and that through our body we feel like me, and we feel empowered, and so Hashem gave us the mitzvah to disempower.
We're going to look at, well, that's not, according to the definition we're going to be running with next week, what he's described, we're going to be going into evil. What your rabbi's describing is not evil.
Yeah, okay, that too, but evil, we all experience that, and the shame is our separation, really, and between each other, and we use the body, and that's how we get into trouble. But
no, boy, you stay tuned. Make sure you show up. I want you to rearrange your entire life now so that you're here at 8 o'clock in 1 week.
Oh my goodness.
No excuses.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to go with Bante now. Meditation, understanding distractions, lesson 3. Okay. Mindfulness is a function that disarms distractions. You know that mindfulness is a cure to everything, focusing, looking at it for what it is. In the same way that a munitions expert might defuse a bomb, weak distractions are disarmed by a single glance. Shine the light of awareness on them and they evaporate instantly, never to return. Deep-seated habitual thought patterns require constant mindfulness, repeatedly applied over whatever time period it takes to break their hold. Distractions are really paper tigers. They have no power of their own. They need to be fed constantly or else they die. If you refuse to feed them by your own anger, fear, and greed, they fade. This is true. And what's important about this is you have a deep-seated whatever and it keeps popping up. You look at it and it doesn't disappear, but by being, oh, now I'm thinking of whatever, you've at least deflated it a little bit. As opposed to feeding it, you deflate it, and the next time it pops up, it is less potent. So every time you focus your mind on it, you take a little bit more energy out of it, and you just have to be careful by not re-energizing it by dwelling on it. As long as you're not dwelling on it, every time you put your mind to it and say, oh, yeah, I'm doing that again, you take more power out of it. Mindfulness is the most important aspect of meditation. It is the primary thing that you are trying to cultivate. So there is really no need at all to struggle against distractions. The crucial thing is to be mindful of what is occurring, not to control what is occurring. Right. You don't sit there and say, go away, go away, go away. You just like, up, there it is again, up, there it is again, up, there it is again. Remember, concentration is a tool. It is secondary to bare attention. From the point of view of mindfulness, there is really no such thing as a distraction. Whatever arises in the mind is viewed as just one more opportunity to cultivate mindfulness. This guy is great. Mindfulness is the key. It's not like you can always become mindful again. And what you thought was a distraction is no longer a distraction because you're mindful of it. Breath, remember, is an arbitrary focus, and it is used as our primary object of attention. Distractions are used as secondary objects of attention. They are certainly as much a part of reality as breath. So I'm focusing on my breath and a thought comes up, oh, there's the ice cream cone. I'm mindful of the ice cream cone. Therefore, I'm still meditating because I'm remaining mindful. And I go back to the breath because the ice cream cone's gone. Right. It actually makes rather little difference what the object of mindfulness is. You can be mindful of the breath, or you can be mindful of the distraction. You can be mindful of the fact that your mind is still and your concentration is strong, or you can be mindful of the fact that your concentration is in ribbons and your mind is in absolute shambles. It's all mindfulness. Just maintain that mindfulness and concentration eventually will follow. So this is like a cure-all for like, don't get down on yourself. As long as you're being mindful, you're on the path to getting back to your focal point. The purpose of meditation is not to concentrate on the breath without interruption forever. That by itself would be a useless goal. The purpose of meditation is not to achieve a perfectly still and serene mind. Although a lovely state, it doesn't lead to liberation by itself. The purpose of meditation is to achieve uninterrupted mindfulness. Mindfulness and only mindfulness produces enlightenment. Okay, we're going to wrestle with him on enlightenment at a later point, but that's why we say at the end, when we start our meditation, focus on the breath. And when you lose your focus, go back to the breath. That is the meditation. We are practicing remaining mindful. And if we lose mindfulness, recapturing the mindfulness. Distractions in all sizes, shapes, and flavor. Distractions come in all sizes, shapes, and flavors. And by the way, as an aside, his idea of enlightenment is no different than our idea of enlightenment. Why? Because he's talking about this meditation, and it's the meditation that we do. And what are we doing? We're getting detached. We're not letting things run. We are not letting the contents of our mind or the contents of our life run away with us. And that's what we were talking about in terms of transcending the material world. So his idea of enlightenment is no different than ours. He may not go through all these mitzvot and talk about the Torah lifestyle, but he gets to the same place of transcendence. Okay, that's an earful. We're going to stop there. And we'll pick this up, part 3, later next week, because he's got some more stuff here. Okay. Now we will meditate. Okay, we'll stop the recording.